We're good? All right. I'm told we're live again, so thanks. Just thinking about routines and the importance of them, you think about the Lord's Supper, don't you? What is the importance of a routine like that? I mean, obviously, it's to remember Christ's death and everything, right? But do you think part of the reason why it's important isn't just what we're remembering, but the fact that it is a routine thing? Because doesn't he say, and doesn't it say in 1 Corinthians 11, as often as you eat this bread and this cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes? So some people only proclaim them once a year, maybe twice. I proclaim them every week. So I'm just joking with you guys. But still, there is kind of an as often. I think it's alluding to the idea that, hey, repetition, some repetition is a good thing. You guys can be thankful. I missed so many repetition things I missed, but teeth brushing, I held on to that one. It's part of my repetition now. I don't think about it, but you're welcome, you know? So there are so many things like that I think really bless us, and sometimes we don't acknowledge it like we should. There are so many things in the church that are the same way. These repetitions are actually wonderful things if we would appreciate them for that, right? Now, I had a quick note for verse 11 that for farmers, you gotta, not just the lives of everyone, but when you're dealing with farmers, you have to remember that just like a barren woman, it was a double curse back then because you're not really fulfilling your duty as a woman. Well, for a farmer who's got no farm, double whammy. It is just, you're viewed as being cursed by God. Like, oh, something's wrong with you because you can't even get a crop to grow and you can't really provide for your family either. So it just makes it worse. I have here in my notes that wheat was considered a little bit more expensive than barley, and barley would have been consumed by the poorer people. I can't speak to that because I don't know, but I just wrote that down. So, but regardless, wheat and barley destroyed is what it says there in verse 11. Then he goes into verse 12 and he lists trees. He lists 5 different failed trees, and this is actually written in the perfect, which completed action. So the idea is it's as good as has happened. Sometimes in the Bible, it'll refer to something as being complete that isn't even complete yet, but it says that by way of saying this is how guaranteed it is. It's as though it already happened. So I will say it as though it's done because it's a done deal in God's mind, right? The vine dries up, fig tree fails, pomegranate. So I think we know what some of these are, right? Pomegranates. What is that? Well, it's a fruit, this tree that produced a juicy fruit about the size of a tennis ball and had some sweetness to it. It had some pulp in it. They would make it into a juice or a syrup and they would drink it. So there's some scripture references on that. 1 Kings 7:18, 2 Chronicles 3:16, mentioned 20 times in the Old Testament. These things were actually replicas of them were made and were used to as part of temple decorations and even on the hem of the priest's robes. So it's kind of a sign of prosperity there. That's the pomegranate. This palm tree probably refers to a date palm. It's more than 30 times in the Old Testament. It's a tall tree. It would have some of those feather-type leaves, and it would grow well in this very hot climate, especially around the Jordan River, stuff like that. So it would also produce some fruit that you could eat or drink or make syrup out of it. So it, again, provided some sustenance and some shade, things that you need. Now, when we get to this apple tree, does your translation say apple tree there? Does anyone have anything different? Apricot. Okay. Yeah, they're not exactly sure what that is. The interesting thing, I guess, about an apple tree is they don't really grow, at least the ones we have today don't really grow in that region, in that particular climate. So they're thinking it may have been something similar to today's apple, but not an apple tree. And then they put, well, maybe it was an apricot or something like that. It's just unlikely that it's the same thing that we would think of as an apple tree today. So that's why it's debated there a little bit. When it says your rejoicing dries up from the sons of men, the last part of verse 12 there, that would be your harvest. In the context of dealing with farmers, your joy dries up. Well, I thought your crops dried up. Yes. And therefore your joy dries up too. Why? It kind of gets to this idea that what do we know about farmers in their work? How is farming, well, maybe I shouldn't, I was going to say how is farming a good metaphor of faith, but that's not really necessarily the best metaphor. But nonetheless, what is it you know about farmers, right? Instant gratification, yes or no? No. Absolutely not, right? And Mike, you could speak to this. I think you could help us out a little bit. But when you plant something, when's it going to grow and produce fruit for you to eat? Like the exact time and day. You're a pretty good expert in this, Mike. You're not saying much of anything. I mean, he knows it more than the rest of us here, but he's not speaking to it. My understanding is you just don't know, right? How a window. You hope for like, maybe. He's been doing a lot of work over at Discovery Christian too, working on their community garden over there. It's really, really cool concept. So they've been working on that. But what do you know about crops and gardening? Well, there are a lot of things that you can't control, and there are a few things that you can, right? So you do what you can do, and then everything else you know, if I don't do it, nothing will happen. If I do it, something might happen. I'd take might over definitely won't, right? Better odds, but you still can't control it all. It's very, very up in the air, right? So farmers live that kind of lifestyle where they knew it could be good, it could be bad. It's kind of up in the air kind of a thing. So when that goes away, they would often lose hope because they were such a delayed it was such a delayed process to get where they needed to go. If you're there and you didn't get there, how do you get yourself out of it? Instantly? No, you don't have an instant fix. You have to start working on the next thing. And you could know ahead of time, calculate the numbers. We're going to starve to death. We're not going to make it. I cannot, even if everything went perfectly, we couldn't produce enough crops to take care of. You could probably, as a good farmer, start to flesh that out in your mind and know. So what would that do to your mental state?
All or nothing, you have to start over.
How scary would that be, though, to know, by the way, you're going to die in 7 days. Bye. Like, what? That's mentally very distressing. And so that's part of the deal here. I think I just have to remind myself, sometimes more than any physical trouble, it's loss of hope that people really are devastated by. I don't know if you've met people like that or not, but sometimes it's not about what they're actually going through right now. It's the fact that they see no way out. They have no true hope, no true vision to something beyond. That's the real suffering. Worse than the physical sometimes. They can't envision anything different. Have you known people like that? Are you familiar with that? Maybe you've gone, I don't know if you've gone through a season like that or not, but it can be really, really bad. I was talking to my mother, which is a wise thing to do for all of us at times if you can. And she told me she's really into this neurology stuff, and I know next to nothing about it, but I find it fascinating. But she was talking about a person that she was aware of that had some sort of, I don't know what it was. The short answer is this person could get to the point where they were paralyzed. They could not move their limbs. They were stuck. But physically, they were not paralyzed at all. There was literally nothing wrong with that person except their mind would get so down. They would start thinking such negative thoughts, and it would just, sort of like OCD, it would just compound so much that they got to the point where they were physically paralyzed and they could not function. They could not move. And it was temporary. They'd eventually snap out of it, but still, they couldn't. Fortunately for us, by the way, if now you're the kind of person that wants to stress and worry, you're like, oh no, what if that happens to me? This person, I think, was worried about not breathing, and I'm told that your what is it called? Autonomic. Thank you. Whatever that word is, nervous system takes over, and you will breathe. So you cannot mentally make yourself stop breathing to the point of death, evidently. So you're good. So don't worry about that one. It'll be okay. Nonetheless, though, physically paralyzed just because ultimately you're hopeless. In your mind, you don't see a way out. It gets so dark. Hope is such a sad thing to be without, right? I think maybe that's why God talks about it. Faith, hope, and love. Yeah, love's the greatest, but faith and hope, pretty pretty important, right? I would like to draw your attention to a passage just briefly that I think may be a little misunderstood. And it's Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1. If somebody wouldn't mind reading that for us, some of you have it memorized, I think. But if somebody would read Hebrews 11:1, because it talks about hope.
Now, faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen.
Yes. Now, faith is, in the way I learned it in the NIV, faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see, right? So it's really a discussion about faith, but it says faith is being sure of what? What we hope for and certain of what we do not see. Forgive me for sidetracking a bit, but since this is a Bible study, this is a verse I hear brought up a lot, and I'm afraid it can be slightly misunderstood, misconstrued in people's minds, right? What is faith? Sometimes the blanket answer given is belief in the unseen, right? That's kind of the go-to response for a lot of us. Well, I'll show you the definition of faith. Hebrews 11:1. Faith is being sure of what we hope for, certain of what we do not see. It's belief in the unseen. Well, two quick things. Number one, did it say that that's the definition of faith? Is it not possible that this might be a characteristic of faith, but not the complete and utter definition of all things faith? You can Willie's a strong guy. Oh, so now if I say, oh man, you're a Willie, we just know that means he's a strong guy, right? Hey, Willie, that means he's a strong guy because that's a Willie. No, that's a characteristic of who Willie is, and sometimes I might mean that, but you could be a Willie and we might mean something different, but it's all good. It's all good stuff that we mean, but still, right? It can be characteristics of it. Faith is, well, yes, faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see, but sometimes I'm afraid we're thinking of that from our modern day perspective, how, oh, if I see, that means it's my visual stimulus. I can see what's right in front of me, or I'm blind and I can't see. Sometimes the term see refers to something that hasn't occurred yet. I don't see it yet. Are they there yet? No, I don't see it yet. I don't see it yet. Oh, it's there. I see it. Now, what do we know about Hebrews 11:1? It gives two statements. Faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. What are those two statements saying? Are they against each other, or are they complementing each other? These are parallel statements, right? This is a parallelism. It's saying the same thing, two different ways, just to help you understand, just for emphasis sake. So one statement will always explain the other. So Hebrews 11:1, faith is being certain of what we do not see. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means faith is being sure of what we hope for. What does that mean? It means you're certain about what you don't see. Those two statements explain each other. So something that you hope for, does that mean it's already there, you just can't see it? Not the way we use that term. You know what I mean? It's a done deal. It's going to happen. You can count on it. You can take it to the bank. You can get a mortgage on it, whatever. That part is done. But as far as it being physically right there, no, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about you can be sure it's going to happen. That trust, that belief, that is faith. What is it? It's what you do not see. Well, what is it that you do not see? Right? Well, it's God. God and his promises and those being fulfilled. And you go through chapter 11 and it'll give you a nice, big, fleshed out, detailed example of, I'll show you faith. Look at Abraham. I'll show you faith. By faith, I'll give you all kinds of names. You want to know what faith is? All right, Noah. You just go right on down the list. It'll show you that, right? But this just gives us an opportunity to don't be too quick to say, oh, it's belief in the unseen. Because the way modern people today use that, you just assume, oh, okay, so that's what faith is. So faith means that you just can't see it, but you just know it's there. It's all around us right now, and things are happening and mystical. No, belief in what is not seen doesn't necessarily mean visually seen. It means it's not here yet, but it's coming. All right. Yeah.
I was just going to say, Seth, if the average situations carried out there, how many times we hear the expression blind faith? And a lot of people look at our belief as blind faith, but it's not.
Yes.
Me, for 60 years, I heard this blind faith. I said, I can't buy into anything that's blind. And then when I finally saw it, it's far from blind.
Oh, good point.
There's all the evidence to back it up.
Yeah, you can be certain of what you do not see in the sense of, well, like I'm certain of wind, I don't see it. Well, yeah, but there's evidence and there's stuff that you research that kind of shows you, oh man, the evidence is there. It clearly shows that this is, and it's more of in that sense. But I think when you put these two statements together, being sure what we hope for and certain what we do not see, God's delivering on a promise that he hasn't delivered on yet, but he's going to. Faith. Faith is the assurance that that's going to happen. It's the assurance of things that are not seen yet. So I just thought this is a good opportunity to bring that up because it's kind of in the context of what we're discussing. But last thing we want is to cause someone to misunderstand God's word and be scared away from it because we misrepresented it or whatever. And I just noticed Hebrews 11:1 for some reason is on that list of possibly misunderstood verses. Now back to Joel chapter 1. Let's look at verse 13. Can somebody read verse 13 for us?
Gird yourself with sackcloth and lament, O priest. Wail, O ministers of the altar. Come spend the night in sackcloth, O ministers of my God, for the grain offering and the drink offering are withheld from the house of your God.
Thank you. All right. We're kind of repeating what we just dealt with, right? We're back to sackcloth again. We're back to that mourning attire. It's very uncomfortable, make it hard to sleep. We're doing this together. We're focusing on the sadness, right? Another thing about sackcloth is it's sort of like if I came in here with a tuxedo. Everyone would notice and they'd wonder what's up. Or it's sort of like, maybe a better example would be if you had like facial hair and a beard and everything one week, and then you just show up without it. If somebody did something like that, you tend to stand out, right? These are just examples of everyday life.
Yeah.
Anyway, right? It would get your attention too, because mourning is not just a private thing. Sorry for emphasizing this a lot, but if there's any demographic I know of that might struggle with isolating themselves and not wanting to show your true feelings and your suffering and your difficulties in that hard time or a time of mourning, this is the group.
Yep.
That's our mutual struggle, right? We want to look strong, but maybe that's not necessarily what God wants from us. Maybe that's not the true strength we should be exercising. So I've harped on that a lot, but I think that's a lesson for us. Okay. So leaders are to lead in this. Ministers of the altar come spend the night in sackcloth. Not just the people. Now it's the ones that are in charge of the altar. These guys are supposed to set the example of this is the appropriate time for sadness. Let's do this together. So it is something that we lead in. Now that gives way to leadership lessons here. A lot of what I have learned of leadership, which isn't as much as many others know, but a lot of what I've learned about it is the idea of someone who is unshaken, right? When you think of a good leader, you think of someone who eye on the prize, and we're going there, we're going to get there no matter what, not hindered by anything getting in the way. And there's a lot of truth in that. But sometimes maybe you build this false idea around that to think, oh, they're just unfazed. They're not bothered by a thing. They just let it roll right off and they just keep going. But is that really the kind of leadership that God would say is good leadership? Because he tells his leaders, you guys put on the mourning clothes. You guys do it publicly. So they still had their eye on the prize, right? But they're not showing themselves as, oh, I'm just untouchable. You know, I'm just this super personality that's going to help guide you where you need to go. No, I'm showing a bit of my humanity as well. You look like you want to say something. Like, did you want to say something? Sorry, you just make the face. And I'm like, oh man, feel free. You're welcome to. So I think it's a strong lesson. You can be upset. You can be brought to tears. You can be humbled. Still be the kind of leader that God wants you to be. You know, that's helpful, especially for us in the world that we live in. Second question that this brings to mind that I think is good in talking with a group of men like this is these guys were thrown off their routine and now they're supposed to lead into mourning. One of the reasons why they're in mourning is because the routine is thrown off. But this was, for the ministers, that's their job. That's how they lived. Their livelihood was to get up day in and day out and take care of the people's needs in regards to their relationship with God, with the sacrifices and so forth. They lost their job essentially, and now they're committed to more. Is there some sort of a lesson for us? Is there some sort of a example that biblically maybe it's appropriate to find a certain identity in your job? Or let me ask that another way. As Christians, how much should we find our identity in our work? In our 9 to 5 or whatever it is? Where do you draw that line?
Minimal.
Minimally? You say minimally. Why say you minimally?
Because the only way I think we place any emphasis on what we do is if it's something that glorifies God. Our whole waking, breathing existence is supposed to be glorify God, which we know is impossible to do, but that's what we're supposed to strive for.
Mm-hmm.
So if we get too caught up in what we do, then we always worry about things like pride coming in. And the fact of the matter is that even a priest who may be exalted to get to a point where he's not, because he can no longer function. So this is where the humility comes back in and lets us know that God's running the show.
Okay. Cool. So be careful not to find too much identity there.
Right.
Anyone else? Where would you personally draw the line and say, you know, for my work, this is the limit? Or are you a nothing kind of guy? Like, I hate my work, want nothing to do with it. I just do it because I have to. Oh, yeah, sorry.
I remember hearing a little snippet, and it might have been from Martin Luther, but a shoe polisher comes up and asks, I'm polishing shoes, how can I glorify God? And Martin Luther said, be the best shoe polisher you can be for God and His glory. So I think the identity, building on what he said, the identity moves in so far as I remain dependent on glorifying God and seeking His glory in that job.
Boy, such a good point. I'm astonished that you speak with Martin Luther, but that's another topic. Wow. Yeah, that's good. Okay. So, yes.
I have an elder friend that told me that he really loves his job. He dreads going to church, going to the job every day. And I said, why is that? If you like your job. He says people have to work there. He said, they know I'm a Christian, and they are not. He said, so I hear a lot of vulgarity. They plaster pictures on the wall that eyes ought not to see. And he said, I've thought many times about quitting. He said, the one thing that keeps me from quitting is an awareness that it's the darkness that needs the light the most.
Yes. So your work has another job for you to do. For many of us, boy, I like that too, because I have to remind myself the darkness, unfortunately, isn't just out there. Darkness creeps in here too. We need the light also, don't we? Many times we will allow our lights to dim out too. That's a good point. Is there a healthy amount of, what about Solomon and his wisdom when he writes Ecclesiastes? Does he talk about finding satisfaction in your work? Well, everything's worthless, yeah. So he pulls out those little what's the best we got in this meaningless vanity of an existence? And he will tip his hat to some things like, you know what? Finding some satisfaction in what your hands do, there's some value there, an appropriate amount of value, not blown out of proportion, because we have a more important job that we have to do. I guess one of the reasons why I'm bringing this up is because as men, the fact that God does acknowledge it's not always an all or nothing kind of thing. Like just like with food or with money or with a lot of things, to an extent it's good, and then in excess it's a problem. Value in your job, to an extent there is some good there, but in excess we've got a problem because we're sidetracked. We're off. We're off. But some of us might be off on the other side. Sometimes we need to get up and do something, and we'll feel a little bit better, because that's part of the way that God made us, is to be a little bit more active. And in a culture that we're living in now, man, you can be lazy. Oh, we've made it so easy, to do nothing and to somehow be entertained. My kids are all the time complaining about being bored, and I'm like, oh, embrace that boredom. I wish I could be bored. I just haven't been able to be bored in so long. Love it while you can. But man, boredom's a good thing, because it drives you to do something sometimes rather than do nothing. So there's some value there in our work. Any other comments or questions? Any other thoughts on this? Guys, I appreciate you sharing so much. Thank you for these bits of wisdom, especially in some of the work that you come from, because I live my job and I love my job, but I'm kind of in a unique situation that everyone gets to do what I do. So the lines between work and family, and well, I work with my family. Here they are. You know, it's so great. Other people are in the exact opposite. They have to do that in order to provide for their family, but it's a dark place, and they're there. Number two and one, provide for their family, and nobody else is going to witness to them. So you got to. So all of that is very important. I hope you're thinking of something that you can write down, because I think God wants us to do something. So that's what we're going to end with. Thank you all for being here. Next week, Jonah, the prophet Jonah.